So yeah, thanks everybody for coming. My name's Andrew Harmel-Law. I'm a tech principal at ThoughtWorks, which means it's a job title I get, which means that I feel like I could still code at any minute, but I don't get to anymore. And this talk is about architecture and being a software architect and the fact that it's stressing me out. So I'm going to share some stuff. So why am I stressed? I'm stressed because I was thinking about this. The first talk I did at Devoxx a long time ago, and so Mark this morning said that Devoxx is great at encouraging new speakers. They were. I gave a talk, and the theme of the talk, maybe 8 years ago, was that stuff's moving really fast, and it's all going really rapidly, and we need to keep up. That was my talk, basically. And here are 5 things that I think are moving fast. Since then, things are moving faster. Things are moving, changing even more rapidly. I think I said in that talk, it's like the things that used to be, because I used to work for a hardware manufacturer, which no longer exists. So things that used to be expensive and slow are now super fast and super cheap. The things that you were supposed to never do are now the things that you're supposed to do on purpose, like test in production and stuff, right? Tons of stuff has changed. I was at a conference last week where Mike Feathers did a keynote, and it was about ChatGPT, and the first slide was just the day's date, so that if people watched it in the future, 3 weeks away, and it was wrong, then he wouldn't get blamed for it. So it's kind of scary. Stuff's moving fast. Architects are not moving fast, right? I am an architect. We are not moving as fast as we need to. And the bit that's not moving fast is how we do architecture. The architectures are moving fast, right? Everybody's building microservices, which we weren't building a few years ago. People are thinking about ChatGPT, which they weren't thinking about 5 minutes ago. So stuff is, the architectures, the end result is changing, but my argument is the way that we do software architecture isn't keeping up. There's memes that describe how we approach this. This is the first meme. That is a public domain image of what I'm going to tell you as an ivory tower, and that is me from the top of the ivory tower throwing PowerPoint architectures down to teams who are going to implement what I've told you to build, right? Nobody, even the people in the ivory towers are like, this is not working as efficiently as it should do, right? That's not a great way to do it. And so we're not, if people are in ivory towers, here we go, this should work. You just feel like you're throwing anchors down at people, right? It's not cool. Because of this, I was having nightmares. I had this slide in another presentation, and somebody has called it Andrew's drama queen slide, because I'm the person lying on the bed, because I am losing sleep, because I am stressed. So, and me being an anchor is one of the things that stress me out, right? But so what people do, ivory tower architects don't actually exist that much anymore. They kind of do. Lots of my clients have architecture review boards and functions that work like that, but even they know that it's not working, so they're trying to do different things. I'm a thought worker, so we're super agile, and with a capital A and a small a and all that kind of stuff, and Martin Fowler and blah, blah, blah. So we break the system, right? We do it differently. So we are hands-on, down in the trenches, coal mining architects, right? Pairing with dev teams. But that's not, if I'm being honest, that's kind of hard too, right? Because at the very best, what I'm doing is I'm running around from team to team, trying to learn as much as possible from that team about what their system is doing this week, because it might not have been doing it that last week, because architectures evolve. And I'm trying to help them come up with the best next small incremental step that they can make to do this and to deploy this new running version of the software, right? And then we do some design, probably these days on a Miro board. Maybe I pair program on some code, which never happens. I'm just saying that to make myself feel better. And then I leave and hope that they implement it. And then I move to the next team, right? Because there are never, and it's an anti-pattern if there's as many architects as there are teams, right? That feels a bit weird. Not people doing architecture. Because doing architecture is super important. Doing architecture and having good software architecture is more important now than it ever has been. And I'm sure you know this, because bits of your system that suck because they have a really sucky architecture, if you need to move fast and change and evolve or whatever, work with those systems, if the architecture sucks, it's flipping horrible. If you're a dev, right, if you're trying to ship code. So I was feeling, even if I was trying to do all the right thing and collaborating in a two-way street and lots of feedback loops and all this kind of stuff, I was still feeling like a bottleneck. Now I'm the bottle in this picture. But there's a value in doing it, right? And there is a value in me having this big picture view, and there's a value in me having this longer term experience, because I can remember when computers were physical and you used to pay for them and touch them and they came in boxes. There's a value to that, right? But the problem is, and this is what I'm going to kind of describe to you, the problem of how people try and do architecture, how we are set up in many organizations, and lots of the clients that we work with, how we try and do that is not working, or is not working, but we're a bottleneck, right? The teams could be going faster if the architecture function, if the bringing of the architectural abilities and the architectural mindsets and stuff could be brought to more teams more rapidly, teams could go faster, right? Agile makes teams go faster, DevOps makes teams go faster, product thinking makes teams go faster. Everyone's ready to go faster, apart from architects who are like, we're in an ivory tower, we'd like you to come to our weekly architecture review board and present your thing. And we'll probably say, we'll get back to you in a month. That's not good, right? But architecture is still super important, because when it sucks or when it's absent, everything else sucks. So I had a nightmare. That was me having the nightmare. My nightmare looked like this, because it was a logical architecture diagram, because that's how, if you've done too much architecture, that's how you sleep and how you think. So I'm now going to draw the logical architecture of an architect having a nightmare of trying to be in too many places at too many times. So this is when the dream starts, right? So it's all cool and everybody's happy and it's fine. So there are teams that need decisions. They come to me, I'm still the bottle. But I'm not a bottleneck because there's only one team, right? So that's cool. So we're best friends and we're hanging out. We draw some pictures on mural. They have a decision, right? Maybe I didn't even do it. Maybe I just nodded and smiled and agreed with everything they said, because that's cool. It's good. They take the decision, they implement it. Tick, it's in prod. Winning, right? It's never that simple. There's more teams. So there's more teams. They come to me. They've still got a decision, some architectural decision that needs to be done. Or maybe I've gone to them because I'm like, this sounds like you're going to do some architecture. We write some documentation. They take it. They put it into prod. But now they've learned something. By putting it into prod and running it, they're like, well, that's interesting. I didn't expect that to happen. Nobody expected it, right? Systems these days are more complicated than you can't predict this stuff, right? I'm not there to see what they've just learned. So they've learned stuff, so they know more than me about the running software architecture, right? But it's not this simple, because there's other teams also, because we're trying to go fast and we're trying to catch up with ChatGPT, who need stuff. So some of the teams on the third team maybe they don't even need a decision, they just need to talk about stuff and kind of think about things. Another team at the bottom, they do need a decision. Now, the email inbox emoji has come into play, because I am now queuing. Teams are blocking up, waiting for me to do stuff, right? Because the way that we do architecture is someone called an architect, with the word architect in their job title and their email signature, needs to say, yes, I approve this, right? So even if I'm not doing anything, if I'm just rubber stamping, I'm still a blocker, I'm still a bottleneck, right? And now I'm crying because I'm sad. You can make so many diagrams with emojis. So this team is good. I have a chat with them. They're unblocked. It's all good. We think we agreed. I have no clue whether they actually understood what I said. They have no clue what I was talking about. Who knows what got into production, right? Because in my opinion, the architecture is largely what's ended in prod, not what I drew on a pretty picture on a diagram. Another team, they put something into prod, may have been my design, may have been their design, maybe we did it together, but it blows up, right? So that's bad. All of these things can happen, possibly could happen. And because we're doing architecture and we're doing evolutionary architecture, this doesn't just happen once. Back in the bad old days of big design up front, at least you do a ton of work at the start, most of which would be wrong, but you wouldn't have to keep doing it over and over and over and over again. Nowadays, you're doing it over and over again. So even if I navigate through this hellscape to the top right box with the green tick and everyone's fine and we all know everything about the system, we're going to go back through it tomorrow with another decision for another team, right? So stuff's flipping hard. I thought at this point, maybe I'm just pardon my French, shit architect. So maybe I'm just not good at this. I spoke to a lot of people, including clients and including colleagues and including ex-colleagues, some of whom are here today. Not everyone thinks like this, but a lot of people, I was enthused by the fact that a bunch of people agreed with me, and to the extent that I pitched an idea for a book about this to O'Reilly, and they've agreed. So there must be some set of people who are searching on the O'Reilly platform who are asking questions like, how on earth do I do enough architecture to move fast? And all this kind of stuff. Because we need architecture, right? We've got to have decisions. You've got to have people thinking about software architecture. You've got to have people thinking about the whole as well as the small parts. We've got to think about non-functional requirements, or cross-functional requirements, as I'm contractually obliged to call them. All of this stuff, right? This is important. So how might we fix it? Blank piece of paper. So now I wake up, I'm in a cold sweat, and I'm dreaming of like different emojis and me having no fun. So if I've been dreaming like I'm a software architect, how might I solve this if I'm a software architect, right? So I go back to a blank piece of paper and draw more pictures with emojis. Things that definitely still need to happen, and will probably inevitably have to happen even more, even faster, is there will be multiple teams who we are hopefully going to make as autonomous and independent as possible, because that's the way that we go fast. They will need decisions, and then they will end up with decisions which they can implement, right? That is going to happen. All of the ways that you know about, and I did a lot of research because I'm writing a book for O'Reilly about this, there are a lot of ways to make decisions, but most of the ways that we know about are some blessed smart person, white, male, middle-aged, heterosexual, tells you what the answer is, and then you go off and do it, right? That's how architecture works. But that's a bottleneck, right? So is there alternative ways? There are some alternative ways. So I disappeared into the world of like trust organizations and bonkers reading, and I read about Patagonia, which is amazing, and the guy who runs Patagonia basically doesn't want to run Patagonia, so just tries to be as absent as much as possible and let everyone do their own thing. All of these things. Is there ways to do this differently? Yes, there is. What we want is a way where we can draw straight lines, because that's like a non-blocking architecture, right? That would be good, right? Independent teams, right? The alternative view of the architecture is like a blocking architecture. If you drew that on a diagram and then asked an architect if they thought it would scale, they'd be like, that's never going to scale. That's you trying to stop me doing my work. Okay, maybe it will scale. You need something like this. So what if we step back and we still think about this like we're trying to design an architecture? Requirement number one, we need a decentralized, non-blocking way to make decisions. Requirement number one. And it turns out that there is a method that works like this. There's probably more than one. And what's cool is when you start doing this talk, or I start doing this talk, people come up to me and go, we've ended up at a similar place by just looking at, having a nightmare, going back to first principles, which I'm doing now, and thinking about how to do it alternatively. There are other paths. I'm just going to tell you the way that I figured out by reading books. There is a way to do this, right? And there's this beautiful, glorious zone. You can fill this zone in something which comes from trust organizations. It's fully decentralized. It's a way of making decisions. It runs in parallel. It's pull-based, so the people who need the decisions bring in the expertise that they need, as opposed to having to go to someone and it being push-based, all this kind of stuff. And it works. And you end up with the right level of consensus rather than everyone having to agree or one person telling everyone what to do. And it's called the advice process. So this is the advice process. It's going to fit on this slide. It's very simple. Don't be fooled by the simplicity. It'll blow your mind. So it's got one rule. Anyone can make any decision. Job done, full stop. I'm off. I'll see you later. That's how you can do it. It's a bit more complicated than this. But the rule is anyone can make any decision. That's how you get out of the way. It stops being me making the decision. But there's rules, two caveats. The two caveats are, before making a decision, you have to seek advice from affected parties. So people, like if I'm going to make a decision and it's going to make someone else's life suck, it's just being British and polite to tell them ask them what they think, right? Because that would suck. That would be bad. And you should probably ask people who might know something about it. So ask people with expertise. What does expertise mean? Depends what the thing that you're doing. And that's it, right? That's the advice process. So the short circuit way, if we're super trusting and we just assume that this is magically going to work, like we do far too often as developers, we just do this very simple hack and everything magically works, right? You've put in place the advice process. You send an email to everyone if you're an architect and say, I step back from all responsibility, do what you will, let anarchy reign. That's what you can do. You can probably think of many different reasons why this would go wrong, right? Even if you were one of the people who'd be like, this is amazing, but I don't want any other team to do it because we're really good at this, but all the other teams are idiots, they're going to blow stuff up. You're right, no one should probably do this just like that because that would be absolute insanity. So, but rather than falling back to the old way of doing it, which doesn't work and is causing me nightmares, if we double down on this and keep going, what are the things we need to do to make it work? Number one, I thought that this was a bit kind of paternal, but when I roll this out with clients, loads of people are like, I love the idea, but I am not qualified to make decisions. And I'm like, that's cool. I didn't know how to make decisions either at the start, so let's to support you. So people need to have support in making decisions. It's hard, right? Number two, it's nice to know what's happening. You don't want just, again, chaos to reign. That would be horrific and nothing would happen and then your boss would wonder what was going on. And number three, it really helps to help set up the practice and to build the trust, because basically you're trusting people that they're doing the right thing and that they trust you that you're doing the right thing. If you can see, if it's transparent and you can see what's happening, then that helps build the trust, right? So how might you be able to get all these three things? Well, it turns out you're probably already doing it. They're called lightweight architectural decision records. So again, I have clearly not invented lightweight architectural decision records. That was Michael Nygaard in 2011, I think. The thing that isn't in Michael Nygaard's original blog post, but I'm pretty sure, and I'm saying this on a recording, I'm sure, but I can't find the tweet. He said afterwards, ADRs are not just great for recording decisions, they're great for making decisions. If you write them as you're making the decision, not afterwards, trying to fill in the ADR is a really great way of trying to make decisions. So let's look at that and see how it helps. And it will help with all of these three things. Number one. So all of this, apart from the last thing, is directly lifted from Michael Nygaard, because I know there's a million different things written on the internet about ADRs. Many additions to which are good, but I think they need to be added based on what you need, not... Because I remember the days when we used to have gigantic 700-page architecture documents. If you keep adding things to ADRs, you end up back in the bad old days of gigantic architecture documents. So keeping it light unless you need an extra thing is good. So these are the light things. I've added one thing. So number one, the title. The title should say what the decision that you've taken is. So you can't write this at the start because you don't know because you haven't made the decision. I'm going to show you an example where they have made a decision. They've decided to use short inventory IDs. So that's cool. So you can read the title afterwards and go, oh, that's the decision where we decided to use short inventory IDs, not the inventory IDs ADR, and it's not clear what you've done. Next thing inside, the ADR is the decision. So if you want to see a little bit more, what do we mean by short inventory IDs? Because this is an example taken from an ex-colleague called Vizen Tanasa. His startup published publicly all of their ADRs so people could see what they were doing, which is awesome, and I can cut and paste from them. They were in a startup, they were scaling up. Their IDs were part of their public API so people would see them, but they were becoming unwieldy, so they wanted something that was... They were short, but human short, not like, so they had a bunch of requirements. So they decided to increase the ID length, so they scaled up. They were going to use Nanoid, which was a third-party tool, and there was a few other things, so I've hidden it. But this is the decision. If you don't want to know everything about all of the options they thought about, but just what they decided in more detail, you read this. Next up is the really important bit, and this is where you start when you're using an ADR to make a decision. So there's a colleague, friend that I have who's, I've done a few talks with, Diana Montalian, and she's got this cool phrase where she goes, architecture is always, it depends, which is a classic phrase for consultants. We love saying it depends. The point of architecture is you find out what it depends on. Context is where you put the what it depends on, right? We pick this because of these things, right? So this describes what the UUID currently looks like. So you describe the problem that had led Vizen's startup to decide to come up with a new way of doing IDs, right? Because otherwise, if there's no reason to do it, then you're just doing it for fun, and that's kind of a waste of effort. So they describe here, again, if you want to zoom in really closely, you can see all the stuff, but like they're just kind of doing this stuff, right? So the context is not the solution. We've gone back in time now. It's like what was going on at the time, what was the things that were bugging us, making us lose sleep or get stressed, right? Put it in the context. Next up, options considered. You don't just want to pick one. Anti-patterns that I see all the time in ADR, someone's like, it's obvious, we picked this, we did it, bosh. you should think about at least a few things, because thinking about the different ways of doing it, including not doing something, sometimes frequently not doing it, just leaving it as it is a valid option. If you list them out, by trying to list them out, and you don't have 100, you don't have one, you want to have some meaningful amount, like 3 or 4 or 5 or something. By thinking about them, you will be thinking about what are the different ways we could solve this problem. We know what the problem is because we just wrote the context. We're now going to do this. So this is the second part that you write. Next up, the consequences. This is weirdly dropped a lot. It scares me when people just pick a thing and they don't say why. The consequences are for each of the options, and I like to do it for each of the options. If I'm using this to make a decision, sometimes, again, you'll see the options, the consequences of the option that was selected, but not the other ones. That makes me a bit scary. But especially if you're using this to help you make decisions, put the consequences. And the consequences are, this is a benefit of this option, or this is a drawback of this option. This is a good thing, but if we pick this is a good thing. If we pick this is a bad thing. And you can then even say, we picked this one because this good thing happens. We picked this one despite this bad thing. And you really want to think about the bad things, right? It's never just always a good option, right? And then we didn't pick this option despite the fact this is a benefit. We didn't pick this option because this thing is a bad thing and it will really kick our arse, right? So we're going to not do it. So you put your consequences in. And then finally at the bottom is the only bit that I've added. So we've said we're going to do the advice process. Just get people to write the advice on the ADR. So you go and seek the advice from the people, and those people, you get them to write their advice down, and then they say who they are, not a considerate product manager, but because obviously all product managers consider it, but who they are, what their position was, and their advice, right? The key thing is it's advice. You can completely ignore it. You are totally empowered with the advice process to ignore it. You have to seek it, and then you can do your own thing. But because it's written down, people in the future can see. So if you've got a valid reason, you're like, that's cool, but that DBA really loves Oracle 9i rack, and it's out of support, and it cost a fortune, and we don't use it anymore. So then they can say what they want, but then you can say, we're still not taking it because despite the fact it was recommended. So you get all of this benefit of this stuff, you get all of this cool stuff, right? So that's not in the thing. And then when you get the advice, so that's the third thing you do, then you go back and go, right, are we going to change our decision? Do we need to add more stuff to the context? Because people will ask you questions that you don't know the answer to, and you put it in the context. All this stuff. So that's it. So lightweight ADRs. There's loads more. Look for the book when it comes out in a year and a half's time, when I finish writing it. Because there's tons that I could talk about for this. But that's it. So, do we think, trust me, there's a lot of stuff in the book, it'll support less experience in decision making? Yes, it totally works. Right? And if you sit down with people, especially if you're an architect and people who want to learn to start making decisions, you sit down, you help them write the ADR. Do we know about who was consulting their advice? Yes, we do, because it's written down there. And it's nice because that positively reinforces the people going out and getting that stuff, right? Yes. How do we know about all decisions? Knowing about all decisions is super easy, because if you're following Michael Nygaard's advice, you will be doing what he said to do, which is store ADRs in the tooling next door to developer stuff. So either in the source control in a repo, or in a Confluence, Atlassian can pay me later, or other wikis are available. You could even, and this might get me stoned out of the building, you can put them in Jira, and I've done this a lot, and it works well, because you can do things like track the status of things. You can see when something was created. You can look at how long it takes to make a decision. You can see who commented on it where. All of these tools you can plug into something like Slack, and that's how you tick your last box, because you can see if someone's created a new ADR. Everyone can just see it happening, right? If you're interested, you can click on the link and you can click into it and read it, right? If it's in Jira, when it changes status from like draft to proposed, then I can definitely have a read of it, right? Because I'm like, oh, it's gone to proposed. It's now not changing every 15 minutes. Someone's got an idea. Or when it goes from proposed to adopted or something, right? So all of these things, I don't care, right, how you do it, but the key thing is if you follow Michael's steer on doing it, you'll be doing it right because it's in tools. You don't need to make a bureaucratic rule that people need to tell everyone that it's been created. You can see it, right? It's been created because Slack has, or whatever has told you that it's happening. So that's the last thing. So, quick thing that I always forget about. Because of this is a bonus, right? We're clearly teaching people to make decisions because there is a reason why architects are in the position architects are in, because they've just got more experience making decisions. You end up being an architect because you've just taken quite a few decisions, and then you make more and more and more, and slowly you drift in that direction. But you're doing that by learning, right? This resource that you get after you've created all these things, you get the ADR history, and this isn't part of this, it's just part of the benefits of doing ADRs. You get an awesome history for people who want to learn how, A, why did we make these decisions, but B, how did we get here? New joiners can read it, but also people who want to learn how to make decisions. There'll be some really awesome decisions, and there'll be also some real nightmares where everyone thought they were super smart, and we made an awesome decision, and then 6 months later it blew up in our face. You can tell people to read it and go, look, we missed this, we didn't see this stuff. It's an awesome learning resource, right? So that's it. So I thought at this point I'd come up with something amazing. I wrote up a blog post, which is a link to at the end, which tells you all about this in more detail, and that's how you get commissioned by O'Reilly to write a book. But Martin Fowler, name drop because it's on Martin's website, Martin was like, this sounds amazing, it sounds really inefficient. You've told me you're going to make everything go fast, you've just slowed everything down. And I was like, oh shit, maybe I have slowed everything down. So what we're going to do now is, because it's Martin wrote the book Refactoring, we're going to put the refactoring step into this. How do we refactor this to not change or remove anything I've talked about, right? Because that's refactoring. The functionality, like the requirements of what we've built, are going to stay the same, but we're going to make it go faster because Martin Fowler called us out and told us it was going to be slow, and he was probably right. So how do we refactor it to optimize? We've got this, we've got that. What you need to do is set up an architecture advice forum. So you might already have one of these, which is misnamed the Architecture Review Board, which is architects who are miles away from the source code, sitting in an ivory tower, probably creating PowerPoint slide decks, saying yes and no to stuff. So you remove their power, or typically what has to happen is architects need to surrender their power. And instead it's an advice forum. So what is the advice forum? So the architecture advice forum is, and again, it can totally depend. I had an awesome way to set this up, and then my client, 2 clients ago, was like, we're fully async, we hate meetings, you can't have a weekly meeting that lasts an hour, which invites 50 people, because that was totally a really good way to set this up. So but it works async. But what you do is, you set up a weekly meeting, which can take between 30 minutes and an hour, because we ended up at 30 minutes for this async company. You invite all of the leads from the teams and anyone else who wants to come from teams that are involved in the scope of this rollout, right? You maybe aren't doing this across your entire organization. Maybe you're just doing it within one team, right? You also invite the architects, and you also invite the standard people who would be asked for advice. So I've got a list, because I always forget who they are. Infra, they always tell you can't do stuff, right? So ask them at the start, and they'll tell you why you can't use Kubernetes right at the beginning. Security, ditto, they'll tell you why you can't use Kubernetes, so then they'll come and tell you at the very start. Product management, it's amazing. Like, product management love to be in at the start of these things, because what they typically find out is you've built it, and they're like, you did what? Product management, or BAs, or whatever, right, if you don't have product managers. Operations, they'll tell you that it's completely unsupportable, really. Also, all of these people, if you're getting advice from them, if they're all in the same room, what happens is, you've drafted an ADR, you think there's a decision, right? Maybe you don't have even any of the options. You can create your context, you can highlight what you think you need to get decisions on or input on. You then present it, the team brings it up at the ARB, AAF, and then you go into like a very quick advice offering phase, right? It sounds like it would be an absolute disaster, because a load of architects, 50 people in a room offering opinions, sounds like it's going to be interminable. The fact that it's only advice and that the team retains all of the ability to make the decision cuts through all the noise. No one's arguing, no one has to win or lose or whatever. It's not a zero-sum game. People can just share information and listen to it and take it down and work. And it's like I've written it publicly on the blog post on Martin's site. I have never been and looked forward to a 50 invitee meeting on a weekly basis, because it gets stuff done. It's like the CTO and the CEO came to one of them in one client I did, because they could see all of their people doing stuff, which made them feel good. So it totally works. So, one other thing. If you want to check if you think it's going slow, you can do like what I would call the 4 key metrics for decisions. We used to do this, so we would track to see how quickly decisions made their way through, so like from drafted to accepted, and we would see how many decisions had to be backed out because it turned out it was a disaster. So that's 4 key metrics for decisions, right? Decision frequency, decision lead time, number of bad decisions, time to re-implement a good decision. That's 4 key metrics for decisions, right? Totally works. So, super powerful meeting. At this point, because there's one last bit that I want to cover, I thought I was being super smart. It turns out someone called Ruth Mallon had written a blog post about something very similar to this a long time ago. So I'm properly stressing the fact that this is, other people have ended up here. This is my recipe for getting here. You can get here in different ways, but the key thing is this kind of the decision-making and the support for that. But Ruth said something really interesting. This is why it works. Ruth said, in order for an architecture to be successful, which means it's habitable, it's hospitable, it delivers value, it can change and evolve, right? It's not perfect. It's not like, amazing. Nobody's is, right? I've seen a lot of architectures. They're never perfect, right? But it's the way to make it work is ensuring that conversations that need to happen are happening, right? Not always initiating them, because you don't need to now, right? You've just given people the space to have them. Nor always helping folks or navigating them. And that's the hard bit for architects, because that's what we do. That's our default. We're probably architects because we like telling people what to do, so you've got to ungrip and let go. But the key thing is ensuring those conversations happen, because seriously, the best bit about this as an architect, and I think as developers who I've worked with when we do this software development feels like software development should. So to go back to the stuff that Sven was talking about at the start, like developer joy, people aren't getting each other's way. They're offering advice. They're helping. They're supporting people. That's what you want, right? And if you don't know enough to make a decision, you want someone to come and tell you their experience, right? And then you do it together. So you guide when needed, but that's it. So all of the functions are still there. All of the expertise is still there, but you've removed the blocker, and it totally transforms it and puts it on its head. So that's it. Tick the box, refactor optimized, done. 18 minutes left for questions. Obviously, this can go wrong. So if we take the metaphor forward, which is like if this is a system and we're rebuilding the system, the classic architecture mistake is to design the system, then the system gets implemented, and before it's gone to prod, you leave. Right, typically. That's one of the things I said when I get staffed at ThoughtWorks. It's like sometimes we get staffed and then the client doesn't want to pay, or we've swapped someone in, right? I make a bunch of bold claims. I tell you to do stuff. I leave before it blows up in everyone's face, and that's cool. I think I'm the world's greatest architect, so I've never seen my stuff in prod. The whole thing is you've got to see it in prod, right? If you don't see it in prod, it might not be what you think it is, right? So that leads me on to how to fail. This will fail in a million different ways, and I will now tell you the 4 key ways that I've seen it failing so you can spot it and you can fix it. So, number 1. This is a trick. It's not actually a failure mode, but you thinking it is a failure mode is a failure mode. Pay attention. If you're someone who makes decisions, or if you're watching another team make decisions, you will see teams making decisions which you think suck. Bad decisions. Only a fool would use, I don't know, lambdas. ChatGPT. Only a fool would use ChatGPT to do insert random thing X, right? Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm right. I don't know because I can't see into the future, right? But the way to make this fail, number 1, is to stop it happening before someone goes, it's cool, you can make all the decisions I agree with. As soon as I disagree, you don't get that power, you have to stop, right? Trust disappears. It's not really cool. We're doing this as theater, right? We're not really doing it. So you've got to step back, and it's really flipping hard. What you do is you let the team make the decision. Like whether it's a set of peers, you give them the advice, you tell them it's really strongly. Like I once was on a call with a colleague, and they were like, I feel contractually obliged as a highly paid consultant or like an expensive consultant to tell you I think this is a terrible idea. They're like, that's fine, we acknowledge it. Right? Still did it. We were right that time. Other times, I've been wrong. So yeah, what you do is, and then you let it happen. If it succeeds, you massively celebrate it, and you make it clear to people. If you were thinking, I wanted to stop that, you tell people you wanted to stop it because you share that emotion, because other people will feel too. If it goes wrong, you just help people learn from the experience, right? Because that's what you do. And that's how you reinforce the thing, because it's learning. I've made tons of mistakes. That's how you learn. You learn by making mistakes, right? If you're worried, you help them make it a smaller decision, so therefore it'll blow up in a smaller way or cost less money, right? There's millions of different, and that's just smart decision making, right? The business loves that kind of stuff. So, key thing, don't fall back to taking people's power away or telling people no. Number 2 is a real failure pattern. This is not a trick. Old guard equals new guard. That's where it's gone into theater. So you've told everyone that everyone can make decisions. Everyone nods and smiles. The people raising all the ADRs are the architects. And then you ask people, they're like, no, it's fine. We like all your ADRs. They don't really. They think you're jerks. But they're just too scared to say it. This is because you haven't got out of the way. Or you've said the words, but you haven't, like how you've communicated. Again, Diana Montalian's got this because Diana crashes into this all the time. She's got a thing where it's like advice is not opinions. If people are a way to stop this happening, if you want to undermine this process, if you want to be evil, don't give people advice, give them opinions. Kubernetes sucks. Don't tell them why, because that would allow them to come up with a better solution. Just tell them that Kubernetes sucks, right? Or ChatGPT is the greatest thing alive. If you're doing the process, you need to help people like ask why, find out why, right? Because maybe, okay, you're right. Kubernetes does suck for that, but you were on a version of Kubernetes 17 years ago, and now this happened, and we also know that we're going to do this and we're not going to do that. So therefore, we acknowledge that risk, but we're going forward anyway. That's how you break this down. And the key thing is, if you fall back to this, you haven't gained any of the benefits of why you wanted to do this, which is getting yourself out of the way, right? Scaling teams. Everyone's still waiting for people to do what the architects tell them to do. How to fail number 3, off-the-grid decisions. I tricked you again. It isn't actually a failure mode. If 2 is happening, sometimes you will see teams taking decisions because they're like, this is amazing, we can make our own decisions. But if we write it down, someone will tell us to stop. So we won't write it down, we'll just do it anyway. So that's an off-the-grid decision because they've just gone rogue. That's good because, double thumbs up, they've decided to do it, right? That's amazing. Fingers crossed they did a good job because they probably didn't ask that many people for advice, but you want them to do it. So if you catch it, you want to celebrate it because you're celebrating people taking responsibility, because this key fact, responsibility spreads out across multiple people as opposed to just sitting in the architects, right? So you don't tell them to stop, but what you do is you retrospectively write up the ADR. Retrospective ADRs are fine. ADR is just a record of a decision that got made. And you find out why, if you're the person in the position of, if you're the person they're hiding from, you find out why the team was too scared. Maybe they just didn't know. Maybe they fell asleep when you were telling them you told them, you told them to watch me doing this video and then they fell asleep and they went and did something more fun, right? So they didn't actually understand it. So you can find out and tell them and stuff, right? So that's good. Last one, this is the spectacular fail. And so I have yet to see a place where this won't work, but if you are and you should probably question your life if you think that this will not work, but you do have people who are like, there is no way I can trust any developer to do anything. It will be a disaster, or any of my coworkers. And people like that do exist, right? I feel sorry for you, and that really sucks because development, people said at the keynotes this morning, development is not typing, right? Development is thinking, it's problem solving, it's all of these kind of things. If I'm in a position where I don't trust the people who are clearly doing knowledge work, then that's a bigger problem. So then maybe you step back and look at a bigger problem. But if there's no trust, you need to kind of look at yourself and go, right, what would help us build trust? ADRs and the advice process and the AAF are awesome ways to build trust. You can do it small, you can start small, just one team, or you can not do theater, but you can do it, but then pass the decision up to architects and go, we've made this decision, would you ratify it? So the architect just goes rubber stamp, right, or whatever. So you can do safe ways of doing it, and it works quite good. Because this is the thing, right? If it's working, the way you know this is working is because you'll see a flipping lot, I was going to swear, a lot of ADRs going really fast and a lot of stuff moving really quickly. And you'll see people learning and you'll see people communicate. You'll see, I used to work with some of the guys down here. One of our delivery managers used to say the measure of a healthy team, I'm paraphrasing, where you could hear people talking. And that's what he didn't like about COVID. You couldn't see, but he was on chat. So you'd see people chatting on chat. When people are chatting, then you know stuff's happening, right? When people are, right? So then you can see this happening. Then you're getting out of the way, so it's working, so it's scaling. So that's how to fail. Because the point of this is we're trying to scale a practice of architecture. Things are moving too fast for there to be a bottleneck in our architecture process, right? There may be some fundamental key things which still need to have a different method of decision making. So for example, cross-functional or non-functional requirements, maybe those need to be decided, not the decisions on how to implement them, but the requirements themselves. Maybe those need to be decided with some other process like democratic or something, right? Principles, maybe those need to be decided, right? These are the 12 principles which everyone in our team kind of holds sacred. Maybe you work on that, and these are in the blog post that I'll share at the end. Some of the key things that make sure everyone's lined up in a similar direction, maybe you use a different thing for those, but with that landscape in place, you want to unleash all of this power, right? Hopefully I've made it clear you can't half do this. If you half do it, you fall into one of these problem spaces, right? But you can experiment, right? Maybe it's not for you. But you should experiment. If you do it, then you can, and this is why it's called fostering a commune in the ivory tower of architecture. The architecture still exists, right? Doing architecture, thinking about architecture, trying to come up with really freaking awesome code that does really cool things. That's still there and evolves and lives and that we're proud of, all this stuff, right? But you've broken down the doors and now everybody is in that ivory tower doing the stuff they need to do when they need to do it, right? Which leads to this. So it's kind of an anybody approach to architecture, but it's not. I used to have this slide that used to say it was an everybody approach to architecture. To be super clear, it doesn't mean that the grad person or the person who, is barely just, learning how to, understand Git, you're not obliged to take decisions. If you want to take decisions, the power is there for you to do it, right? So it's anybody who wants to, who feels they can contribute, right? And so there you will end up things will naturally end up in some kind of balance of where your groups and teams and organization needs to be. It'll change because things will change, right? You'll get bigger or you'll split up or you'll go off build different products or whatever. It'll find its natural place, right? That finding its natural place is also important because I said the core of it is the advice process, right? It's really simple. The point of it being really simple is because it shapes itself to your culture, right? Your culture, your code base, your skills, what you're building right now, what your customers expect, what the current climate expects, all of these things, that comes from your company, right? What you're trying to build. That fills in the gaps, right? So it's not like a really small thing which you're hoping is going to magically work. All of your culture fills in all the gaps, right? Your architecture, how you deploy software, all this stuff, right? Because it'll change. But this is the goal that you're aiming for, right? And that's the point. That's why we build these small, independent teams building reactive systems, because the environment we're building software for, we can't predict the future of that environment, just like we can't predict, how we're going to build these things. So I'm just stealing all of this stuff I've just stolen, basically, right? Maybe not stolen, been inspired by. Because that's how that's why we build microservices or smaller pieces of software so we can release them more frequently. That's why we release more frequently as well, because we can find out how it runs, right? All of this stuff, we're doing it because the future is a lot less certain than we thought it was, so therefore we're trying to optimize for that, right? So what I'd encourage you to do, and then we've got time for questions, is give it a try. Again, I think there's a few things on how to give it a try on the blog post, which I'll share in a second. There's going to be tons about that in the book. But you don't need anything else, right? The book is just me rambling on for pages and pages about all of this stuff. There's not much else, right? There's a lot else, but this is the core. What's really cool is people have come back to me. Other people have done talks about this. So there's some, I should remember his name, it's going to be really bad. There is someone in a bank who's done this. So if you think this won't work, there's somebody in a bank who's done this. I've done this at a bank, right? So if you think you can't do it because you're in a bank, think again. But if you do, hit me up on Twitter. I've got the least memorable Twitter handle in the universe. But or find me on LinkedIn or whatever, because people are, and if it doesn't work, tell me about that too. Because I'm learning about the simple bit plus everyone, plus your culture and all that kind of stuff is super interesting. So, please reach out. Oh, and I've got a training course. I forgot about that. I wrote a training course. If you want to hear me talking about this for 3 hours, and we get to write ADRs. So so much. There's so many other things. I've admitted there's so many other things. So that plus other stuff is on the training course. Yeah, and that's my Twitter handle, AL94781, because obviously I signed up for Twitter when I didn't think it was going to be important as what your Twitter handle looked like. That's my login from my first ever company that I worked for. And I've got 6 minutes left if anyone has questions. Or maybe none. Yeah, go.
Thank you for the presentation. So if there is any new approach architecture, do we still need some architects?
So sorry, the question is if the team needs some architects.
Yes, if until some architects need
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So the question is, do you still need architects? Yes. Maybe I've done a good job. I've done this talk, I'm doing this talk next week to an architecture conference, and I'll obviously weight it over towards architects to make them feel better, but obviously I'm trying to make everyone here feel good. Both are super important. So what this is good is it makes architects, well, it takes power away from architects in one part because you can't just tell people what to do, but it makes architects never got to write code anyway, right? So there was always this kind of this disbelief gap where you tell people and then you assume it gets down into code, right? That has now been made explicit, so you need to. You definitely need architects. Again, Diana, I need to just get Diana up here one day. But Diana's got a quote from Donella Meadows, which is, you think that because you know about one and one, you know all about two, but you also need to know about and. Architecture is and. So the architects will spot all the bits that all the teams who are hyper-focused on their stuff, they're like, this is going to go badly wrong. So they'll look at like cloud cost, they'll look at like overall system availability, they'll look at like the fact that these things are kind of slowly drifting apart, or the fact that, some teams are innovating and other teams aren't, so they'll spread knowledge around. That role, to be honest, I think gets more powerful because they don't need to worry about doing all of the lower level stuff, because if a team wants to do some low level refactoring in their team, technically, in the old way of doing things, an architect has to go in and approve it. That feels like a bad use of your time, right? So you can spread it out and do. And it's nice, right? Then you can, if you want to be on the architecture track, and this is another thing, like even my colleagues at ThoughtWorks, it's not super clear how you move into architecture. This is paving the start of the road. So you start doing it. If you don't like it, you can just go back to your team. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you. Thank you for your great talk. One question I have, I don't know if you have any advice around, you want these 50 people in a room, you invite, product managers, ops people, all these, architects, all super busy. Yeah. How you get the buy-in and have these people actually in the room giving advice instead of, saying, yes, maybe I'll come, and then never really showing up?
So that's a really great question. Typically, what we've done is we've started and said the people who need to be there are the architects, and they're terrified it's going to go out of control, so they all come. Leads of most teams come with maybe you'll find out, it's a good way of finding out who's quite interested in architecture if they're not a lead in a team. So they'll probably come. And then at the least, if you can get, you can also scare people into coming by saying the developers are going to start making decisions. If you don't come and offer advice, then who knows what's going to happen. So that will bring people out of the woodwork. But if you get them to send at least one person, then one or two will come, and then they'll be like, so this is the thing. Product managers love it because they can say, oh, no, you don't understand our product strategy, because they've never properly explained it. So that they suddenly have a forum to communicate in context of a specific thing, the fact that we made this decision, even though all developers hate it because this is our product market fit that we're going for and we think this is important. So they come. Infra love it. In my experience, loads of people who write the first load of ADRs are infra because they're just desperate to do stuff, and suddenly there's a load of infra things. Security also. Banks, regulatory love it. So I'm kind of not really answering your question. I've never had the problem where people don't want to come because they're just like, they're a bit terrified of what might happen, and then they're like, oh, people are actually taking it seriously. So regulatory loved it at the bank because they're like, oh, I can tell them before they expose us to spectacular financial risk because they haven't written any code yet. So it totally works. But one person from each, and then they'll bring their friends. And like I say, I thought, I was like, if the CTO comes, it'll be a nightmare. Everyone will shut up. Nope. Then the CEO came. That was, so it's like, and that's the thing. So I had to tell them to not say stuff. But they did. They just shut up and just let stuff happen. So it was good.
Thank you. So how does it scale at the large company level? Because I can see it working, and we got it working at a department where there are like 100 people.
Yeah.
And then there's another department doing something completely differently, and then suddenly the two departments need to talk to each other, and they're totally incompatible.
Yeah, so that's really good. So we did 3 clients ago, we did it. We did it in the bit that, so it was easy because we're a consultant. So we came in and we weren't paid to touch everything. We were just paid to take one thing and bring it up to the cloud. So that was 7 teams or something. Vanessa's here. Vanessa will remind me. Teams. Other teams started coming along because they were interested. They set up their own version because various people went to various things. It made sure that we scoped our decisions to just us. If things were bigger, they would have to go up anyway. But it turned out that our optimization factor was mainly we wanted decisions to be as small as possible. Ideally, a team. At worst, a collective or a group working on a load of software. If it does go massive, it's probably not a decision. It's like some principle or some other wider, broader thing, or a constraint. And that works. So, and they then set up their other pieces. So I'm still in contact with the client 2 clients ago, or 3 clients ago. They've got multiple of them, and they kind of cross-fertilize. And certain people, like architects, go to all of them. But even the architects have to divide and conquer, right? They're not across all things. So it kind of just, you get this mod, just like you get with teams. It finds a kind of natural size. So 100 is like 50 kind of attendees, but like that, the 100 stuff will work. And then I haven't broken it yet, is what I'm saying. But yeah, don't go a massive one for like all of, I don't know, Merrill Lynch. That's probably a disaster. I'm out of time, but I'll hang around afterwards if people want to. Thanks very much. Hopefully it's useful.